Hi, my name is Vladislav Feoktisov. I'm a second-year student at Sochi State University, and I'm very glad to see you here. And your visit to the Sochi is very important for us because you share a real experience with us, and experience is the major thing we can learn from you if we are speaking about Sochi 2014 Olympic Games. The first thing I want to talk about is my experience. I have been volunteering for the last 2 years at the Sochi Training Volunteering Center, and I took part in different events here in Sochi, some like these ones, and I want to say that volunteering gives us a real and great experience and gives us an understanding how to work, how to cope with people, how to plan, how to organize the time, and all these things. And so real life experience is always very important because it's way much better than books or guides because they provide real feedback for us. During this season, more than 20 international test events in all 15 Olympic disciplines and 5 Paralympic sports took place in Sochi. As you can imagine, the city of Sochi is a summer resort, which is very popular among Russians. So it's a resort that was designed for the Russian internal market, and now we're having such a huge number of international test events. So volunteers are up to help to develop Sochi from one stage to another stage. And I'm very proud that test events in our coastal and mountain cluster were so successful. Test events is a great rehearsal for the city because we're learning how to work, how to cope with those brand new sporting arenas, which are called by some specialists as the state-of-the-art arenas. And we have been polishing things up for the last 1 year to try do our best to make the seamless experience for spectators. And I would like to speak about International Skating Union Grand Prix finals, which were held from 6 to 9 December last year in the city of Sochi, with men's and ladies singles, pair skating, ice dancing on senior and junior levels. They took place in iceberg skating class. You see, this is a brand new arena. It was my first glimpse when we entered, and you see it's a very unusual experience for the citizens of Sochi, because the city of Sochi is the warmest city in the whole Russia, and when you're having the first glimpse on the ice rink, it makes very impressive feeling. And while those events were very successful, if we speak about spectators, if we speak about athletes, there were some minor issues with organizing volunteering work, and they were not linked with our volunteering training center, rather than they were linked with the training at the venue. So as we have only 200 days before Olympics, I think it's a good idea to evaluate all those mistakes that were made by us, by volunteers, by organizers, so we can train again. And the first issue some volunteers faced was incomplete education. So what is incomplete education? It's the lack of useful information, the lack of training, and the lack of control. Imagine a situation when we are having some 300 volunteers. It's their first experience at the Olympic event, and if we speak about organizers, it's their first experience on the Olympic arena too. So it's very natural that we had some minor problems that we can fix up to these days. So the solution So all these things that I showed to you lead to a misunderstanding, and misunderstanding is the worst thing that could happen on the Olympic venue. Thanks God we had no such big deals during the test events, and next slide. Our team decided to evaluate some solution for these problems. For example, we decided that the best way to train volunteers is the first prepare to train, the second is conduct training, coach trial performances, and follow through. And prepare to train includes 4 steps: breakdown and description, venue floor plans, and real search for cases. The second issue some volunteers faced at the Olympic event was volunteer distribution, and I wanted to describe you one very funny example. Do you know what ticker checker machine is? Yeah, so here during test events we had ticker machine with one button, and the person who was in charge of describing how to work with equipment at the Olympic site told us, please bring me all English-speaking volunteers. I will teach them how to use this machine. So he called us. He explained us how to use this machine, and what happened? For some hours, the whole Olympic arena was left without English-speaking volunteers because they all were busy with training one-button machine. So it's not a very serious problem, but it could have been solved very quickly if the organizers decided to distribute volunteers in a more precise way. So the solution here is to make a list with following information. The first is to include language skills, abilities, preferences, and previous experience, because almost all Sochi 2000 volunteers have took part at the test event, so they can give to organizers at the site a very useful experience, such as machine use and equipment. This third issue is overlapping positions. This issue is very rare, but one should be ready to cope with it, because volunteer is not the only person that is in charge of organizing all these things. So there are some civil services like police, like another security services, and sometimes a big number of volunteers make a mess with them because the whole arena was not designed to host such a big number of people. So when organizers don't use maps while planning the volunteer positions on their list, they have too many volunteers in one place, and somewhere there is no volunteers, so a problem may occur. But this issue is very rare, but we must be ready to cope with it. Next slide. So the solution to this problem is to try to place all positions on the floor plan, feedback volunteers every day, and one should try not to involve as much volunteers as possible. This is a real issue when organizer wants to have great numbers on his report, so he decides to put as much volunteers as possible. I don't think it's the best way of organizing event. And the fourth issue is hierarchy understanding. The major issue organizer of sporting event can face. Imagine a situation when you have a volunteer and you have a team leader volunteer. Team leader volunteer is in charge of operating and guiding all the rest of the volunteers. But team leader volunteer is not the top organizer of the event, so he have some kind of boss, and bosses usually have assistants. So when you have too many people in this chain, blooper can occur. And the only solution to this is, while performing training, to focus on organization chain and competencies. When I ask some volunteers, do you know who is your boss? They said number of different variants, but none of which were correct. because they were not trained to listen for one particular person. They were trained to obey all the persons that wear uniform at the event. And while organizing a team, try to avoid complicated hierarchy. It's very important. The simpler system you have, the more stable it is. And as conclusion, you should respect the time. As Sergei Victorovich says, time is the most important thing that volunteer gives to Olympic game organizers. So respect the time of the volunteer, respect his schedule, try to give him as much information as possible, because if you have a lot of information, you can solve any problem that will appear. You need constant feedback with the volunteer, because sometimes volunteers came up with really great ideas that organizers can't get, because they are very busy working with papers and numbers and things like that. And the best idea is to use maps and floor plans. And if you give a map or floor plan to a volunteer with a job description and breakdown, he will never fail. And the next, the most important thing, do you know this poster, yes? Yeah. Is to keep calm and carry on. Whatever happens, volunteers should be calm, and everything is possible when you are not nervous. Everything is possible when you don't have an instruction, but you have an understanding what is happening around. So thank you. You can ask me questions. Thank you.